The driveway still smelled like fresh rain, a scent that usually brought me peace, but tonight it felt like the smell of a crime scene. I stood there, my knuckles white as I gripped the handle of a single battered suitcase. In my other hand, I clutched the black dress I had worn just hours ago to my father's funeral. The porch light flickered above me, the same light my dad always forgot to fix, a small imperfection in a man who was otherwise perfectly calculated. But now, that flickering light didn't belong to a memory. It belonged to her. My older sister stood in the doorway, her silhouette sharp and unforgiving against the warmth of the home I grew up in. She hadn't shed a single tear at the service. While I was breaking apart at the graveside, she was already mentally rearranging the furniture. "Get out of my house and don't ever come back," she said, her voice devoid of any sisterly warmth. "You mean nothing now." The words didn't just echo in the humid night air. They struck like a physical blow. There was no hesitation in her eyes, no pause for regret. She was simply erasing me from the story we had shared for 24 years. She claimed Dad had left everything to her: the house, the massive logistics business, and the $44 million estate. I remember blinking, waiting for her to laugh, waiting for the punchline of a very cruel joke. But she just stepped aside and pointed toward the street as if I were a trespassing stranger. I walked away because I had nothing left to fight with. My father, Edward Rowe, was gone, and according to my sister, so was my future. As I reached the front gate, I felt a numbness settle in, the kind that happens when your entire reality is rewritten in a single afternoon. But even through the shock, something didn't sit right. Not the silence, not her sudden cruelty, but something deeper. As I looked back at the house one last time, I realized my sister was smiling. But she wasn't smiling at me. She was smiling at someone standing just behind the curtain in Dad's old study. Who else was in that house? I ended up at a small roadside motel off Route 9. It was the kind of place with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that hummed with a depressing rhythm. My father used to joke about places like this when we traveled for business, saying he'd pay for a suite just so we didn't have to breathe the dust. That was the thought looping in my head. Dad. None of this felt like him. Edward Rowe was many things: strict, calculated, and even intimidating when a deal was on the line. But he was never unfair, and he was never cruel to me. We were a team. I had helped him grow Rowe Logistics from a small regional operation into a global powerhouse that investors actually respected. I was the one there for the late nights, the endless spreadsheets, and the high-stakes negotiations. My sister, she barely showed up for dinner, let alone a board meeting. She preferred the lifestyle of an heiress, the parties, the gold cards, and the emergencies that always required a wire transfer from Dad's account. It made no logical sense that he would hand the keys of his empire to the one person who didn't know how to turn the engine on. I sat on the edge of the stiff motel bed, my heart racing, and noticed the folder I had grabbed in the chaos of leaving. I didn't even remember taking it. Inside was a jumble of old documents, contracts, and notes. But then I saw it, a name circled in my father's unmistakable sharp handwriting. Mr. Halvorson, attorney. I froze as a memory hit me like a lightning bolt. A week before he died, Dad had pulled me aside in the garden. He looked tired, but his eyes were piercing. "Althea," he had whispered, "when the time comes, don't trust what you hear. Read everything." I stayed up all night scouring those papers, but it wasn't a contract I found at the bottom of the folder. It was a photograph of my sister and Mr. Halvorson together, dated 2 weeks ago. If they were meeting behind Dad's back, was the attorney even on my side? Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my sister's face at the door, cold, certain, and triumphant. By morning, I was in a taxi heading downtown toward the heart of the city's financial district. The office building of Halvorson and Pike stood exactly as I remembered. Glass, steel, and quiet power. This was where my father's most important secrets were kept. If there was truth left in this world, it was buried in a filing cabinet in this building. The receptionist gave me a polite, professional smile and asked if I had an appointment. No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But my father did. A few minutes later, I was ushered into a private office to face a man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a perfectly composed posture. "Mr. Halvorson?" I asked. He nodded slowly, looking at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "You must be Althea," he said. He didn't call me Miss Rowe. He didn't act confused about why I was there. He knew me. I took a breath and laid it all out. "I believe there's been a mistake," I said carefully. "My sister claims she inherited everything. The house, the money, the company." I waited for his face to fall, for him to offer his condolences and confirm the bad news. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. He leaned back in his leather chair and laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but the laugh of someone who had just heard something utterly absurd. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said, his eyes twinkling with a secret I didn't yet understand. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a second, identical folder to the one I had. "Your sister was here yesterday," he whispered. "She tried to pay me $5 million to burn what's inside this. Do you want to see why?" The room went completely still, the kind of silence that feels heavy in your lungs. My stomach dropped as I realized that my sister had been counting on my grief to keep me blind. My fingers felt like ice as Mr. Halvorson slid a thick document across the mahogany desk. "This," he said with a calm that bordered on clinical, "is your father's final will. Signed, witnessed, and filed 3 months ago." I stared at the pages, the legal jargon, the dense paragraphs, the endless clauses. My eyes blurred for a second, but then one line stood out as if it were glowing on the page. It was bold, undeniable, and final. Primary beneficiary, Althea Rowe. My name, not hers. My breath caught in my throat and I felt a dizzying rush of relief followed by a surge of pure confusion. "That's not possible," I whispered, shaking my head. "She showed me papers. She had me thrown out by the police." "How could she be so confident if this exists?" Mr. Halvorson adjusted his glasses, his expression turning serious. "It's not only possible, Althea. It was intentional. Your father was very clear about his wishes." My pulse started racing so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Then why does she think she owns the world?" I asked. He gave me a look that carried both a deep understanding and a quiet, dark warning. "Because," he said slowly, "she was supposed to think that. There is a conditional clause." He flipped to the very last page of the will. "Your father knew your sister would try to forge a document," Halvorson said. "So he wrote a version that looked real just to see what she would do. But there's a third person mentioned in this will that you've never met." I leaned forward, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "What condition?" I demanded. Mr. Halvorson met my eyes with a gaze that felt like a verdict. "Your sister was granted temporary control of the estate under one specific condition," he continued, tapping the page with his pen. "The condition was that she would prove herself trustworthy by taking care of you during the transition." The silence that followed was suffocating. In that heartbeat, every piece of the puzzle snapped into place. The cruelty, the speed of the eviction, the way she had looked at me with such utter contempt. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a failure. She had been handed a test of character, a test designed by a father who knew his children better than they knew themselves. She didn't even realize she was being watched. She thought she was the queen of the castle, but she was just a guest on probation. And by throwing me out into the rain, she hadn't secured her fortune. She had set it on fire. I sat there staring at the page, letting the reality of it wash over me. My sister hadn't just betrayed me. She had disqualified herself from her own inheritance. Mr. Halvorson folded his hands on the desk. Your father anticipated conflict, Althea. He knew that money changes people, or rather, it reveals who they truly are. That's why he structured it this way. Control was never meant to be ownership. A slow, shaky breath left my chest. For the first time since the funeral, the fog of confusion lifted. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the successor. I sat there staring at the page, letting the reality of it wash over me. My sister hadn't just betrayed me. She had disqualified herself from her own inheritance. Mr. Halvorson folded his hands on the desk. Your father anticipated conflict, Althea. He knew that money changes people, or rather, it reveals who they truly are. That's why he structured it this way. Control was never meant to be ownership. A slow, shaky breath left my chest. For the first time since the funeral, the fog of confusion lifted. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the successor. But there's one problem, Halvorson said, his face darkening. Your sister has already started liquidating the company assets. If we don't stop her in the next 2 hours, the $44 million will be in an offshore account where even I can't reach it. What do you need from me? I asked, my voice taking on the same sharp, businesslike edge my father used to have. Mr. Halvorson didn't hesitate. Proof, he said simply. The law requires evidence that the condition of care was violated. If we can prove she acted with malice and evicted you without cause, the entire estate transfers to you fully and permanently. I realized then that I had more than just my word. I had spent years working in logistics, where every move is tracked and every conversation is logged. I pulled out my phone. I had the voice recording from the driveway. Her voice, clear as a bell, telling me I meant nothing. I had the security camera footage from the house exterior that I could access remotely, showing her standing over me as I held my suitcase. And then there were the texts. I opened the messages she had sent an hour after I left. Don't come back. This is my house now. When I first read them, they felt like blades twisting in my heart. Now, they were something else entirely. Evidence. I stood up slowly, gathering the documents from the desk. Something inside me had shifted. The pain was still there, the grief for my father, and the heartbreak of losing a sister. But underneath it, something sharper and colder had formed. It wasn't just anger, and it wasn't a simple desire for revenge. It was precision. This time, I wasn't walking away. I was going home to finish the job. As I walked out of the office, I got a notification from the house security app. My sister wasn't just packing my things, she was throwing my father's journals into a bonfire in the backyard. I had to get there now. 3 days later, I stood right back where she had thrown me out. The scene looked almost identical, but everything felt different. This time, I wasn't alone in the rain. A sleek black car pulled up behind me, and Mr. Halvorson stepped out, looking like a man about to deliver a final judgment. He was followed by two men in dark suits and a uniformed officer whose presence made the neighborhood quiet down. The porch light flickered again, a rhythmic blink that felt like a heartbeat. It was funny how some things didn't change, even when the world was about to end for someone inside. "Ready?" Mr. Halvorson asked quietly. I nodded, my heart steady for the first time in a week. He stepped up to the door and knocked. Not a polite tap, but a firm, authoritative sound that echoed through the house. We heard footsteps, fast, confident, and sharp. The door swung open, and there she was. She had a glass of wine in her hand and the same expression of effortless arrogance she had worn since the day of the funeral. But then, her eyes darted between me, the attorney, and the officer, and her posture stiffened. "What is this?" she snapped, her voice high and defensive. Mr. Halvorson stepped forward, his face a mask of professional calm. "Good afternoon," he said evenly. "We're here regarding the estate of Edward Rowe." My sister's eyes narrowed. I already told her, "This house is mine. The business is mine. Get off my property." Mr. Halvorson didn't move. He just smiled. "Actually, we aren't here for the house," he said. "We're here for the $10 million in cash you removed from the company vault this morning. That's a felony, and you're going to want to listen to what comes next." "Yes," Mr. Halvorson said, his voice cutting through her protests like a knife. "It was yours. Temporarily." The silence that followed was absolute. He reached into his briefcase and handed her the document I had seen in his office. "You failed the condition," he said. Her hands began to tremble as she scanned the pages, her eyes darting across the legal text she had tried so hard to ignore. No, that's not... This isn't right," she stammered, her face beginning to drain of all its color. "It is," Halvorson interrupted, his voice dropping an octave. "You were required to provide care and residence to your sister. Instead, you removed her from the property within hours of your father's burial. You violated the core tenet of the transition period." The words landed like thunder in the small entryway. For the first time in our lives, she didn't look at me with superiority or disdain. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated fear. "No, you can't do this! You can't just take it away!" she cried, her voice cracking in a way I had never heard before. The same woman who had stood over me like a queen just days ago was now gripping the doorframe just to stay steady on her feet. "This is my house," she whispered, but even she didn't seem to believe the lie anymore. Mr. Halvorson didn't need to raise his voice. The law was doing the shouting for him. "It was never yours," he said. The officer stepped forward slightly, not aggressive, but present enough to make the reality of the situation sink in. My sister looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "Althea, I did it for us," she screamed. "Dad was hiding something in the basement. I was trying to protect you from the truth about how he really made that $44 million. She turned to me then, really looked at me. Not through me, not above me, but straight into my eyes. "Althea, please," she said, her tone shifting with a desperate speed that made my stomach turn. "We can fix this. I didn't know. I thought I was doing what Dad wanted." "You thought I didn't matter," I said quietly, cutting through her excuses. That hit her harder than any legal document could. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. "I was scared. Everything happened so fast, and the money. I just got overwhelmed." "You showed me exactly who you are," I replied, my voice calm and steady. and that calm seemed to terrify her more than anger ever could. She knew she couldn't manipulate a person who was no longer reacting to her drama. Mr. Halvorson closed his folder with a final, echoing snap. "Miss, you'll need to vacate the property immediately," he said. The silence that followed wasn't loud, it was hollow. She finally understood that she had destroyed her own future. But people like her never go quietly. They stall, they cry, and they reach for any straw that might rewind the clock. She sat on the edge of the designer couch she had claimed was hers, watching her empire slip through her fingers. "I'll fix everything," she whispered. "You can stay. We'll split the money 50-50. Just don't do this to me, Althea. We're sisters." I looked at the walls of the living room, and the same ones that had witnessed our childhood, and realized everything felt different. Not because I had won, but because I finally saw her clearly. As she was begging, the officer's radio chirped. "We found the hidden safe," a voice crackled. "And Miss Rowe, you're going to want to see what's inside. It's not money, it's a second will." "You already made your choice," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her lips trembled as she looked at the officer. "I was grieving," she shouted one last time. "So was I replied softly. That ended it. There were no more arguments to be made, no more tears that could wash away the last 3 days. Mr. Halvorson gave a small, respectful nod, and within the hour, the arrangements were made. It was legal, it was clean, and it was final. By the time the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the driveway, the house was mine completely. But as I stood there watching the car carry my sister away, I realized the part she never understood. The will didn't just test her ability to follow a rule, it revealed her soul. Dad didn't leave me $44 million because I needed the money, or because I was his favorite. He left it because he knew something I hadn't wanted to accept. That loyalty can't be inherited. It has to be proven in the dark when you think nobody is watching. When the door finally closed, I didn't feel the rush of revenge I thought I would. I didn't feel like a winner in a war. I felt a profound sense of peace. I felt free. I walked into my father's study, sat in his chair, and opened the final ledger. My name was at the top, and for the first time, I knew I had earned it. But as I opened the ledger, I found a small note tucked into the back cover. It was in my sister's handwriting, dated the day before Dad died. It said, "I know about the test, Dad, and I'm going to make sure Althea fails hers." Was this whole thing a game they were both playing? I thought the battle was over. I thought the $44 million and the house were the end of the story. But as I sat in my father's chair, I found a note in my sister's handwriting dated the day before he died. It said, "I know about the test, Dad, and I'm going to make sure Althea fails hers." My heart stopped. This wasn't just a will. It was a game I didn't know I was playing. And the next round has just begun. If you want to see how this high-stakes betrayal unfolds, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Press the bell icon right now to stay tuned, because you won't want to miss the next shocking chapter of the Revenge Diaries.